Welcome to the Level 4 award in Internal Quality Assurance. We're going to walk through the different qualifications to give you more of a practical guide of how to complete the assessments. Now, if you're completing the Level 5 Diploma in Education and Training, the IQA qualification sits in at Module 11 and it's something you'll work towards the end of the program. Now you can see how IQA fits in within assessment. So you've got teaching and assessors who complete the qualification with the learners, then it goes to the IQA to make those decisions. So as an IQA, you are more of a manager and you're there to help and assist your teachers and your assessors and to ensure it meets regulatory requirements. Once you are finished with the paperwork and you're happy with everything, you send it on to the EQA to verify and then certificate that way. The aim of this video is for you to create an IQA policy, to complete a sampling plan, to carry out an IQA assessment, record IQA assessment decisions, and to produce your own standardization plan. The reason that we complete IQA is for that quality improvement and it's for our own internal certification. So IQA does not mean it's recognized everywhere. It's just a case of internally we are satisfied it meets our own requirements. Now, EQA is an advantage because it verifies the quality. So it's a third organization, so a third party will come in and evaluate your documentation, your processes, and it'll credit your courses against a particular standard. Now, just because a qualification is regulated, it doesn't mean it's the best. And I've also seen unregulated qualifications that can be better than regulated qualification. It all depends on who is running the program and their own processes in place. But EQA is about verifying that quality, so that's kind of that assurance that the course meets the standards. Now we're going to look through the structure of the three IQA qualifications. So we start with the Level 4 award and the understanding the principles and practices of internal quality assurance. And this is assessed via a portfolio, so it's one unit, which is a written portfolio. But this unit also is mandatory in the other units. So maybe you're not quite there ready to do your IQA, but you want to learn a bit more. This is the perfect qualification because it sets the scene for the more practical based qualifications. The Level 4 award in the Internal Quality Assurance Assessment Processes and Practices is the main IQA qualification that qualifies you as an IQA to go into the workplace and internally quality assure the assessment within your training center or within your workplace. And to complete this qualification, what you'll need is access to two different assessors, and both of these assessors will have access to two learners each. So you'll be assessing two different assessors who are then assessing two different learners as well. So it's a total of 4 learners across 2 assessors. The Level 4 certificate in leading the internal quality assurance of assessment processes and practice is the lead qualification. So it's kind of like the highest one out there, but in reality of it, a lot of people don't particularly need it. You must be working in a role of an IQA and you also must be leading other IQAs as well. So the processes of completing the units are quite straightforward and they do build upon previous experience, but in reality of it, they don't really influence your career progression opportunities anyway. So we're mainly going to look at the Level 4 award and more of the practical element of that. So there are several key tasks which you need to do. So the first task is you need to complete a portfolio. So this is going to be mandatory for any IQA qualification that you do. So we are briefly going to touch on this, but in reality of it, we're going to look at more of the practical elements, which will cover part of the theory anyway. So look out for the question symbols in the top right hand corner. Now, the first thing you need to do when you're completing the IQA qualification is submit your own IQA strategy. And ideally, you will be able to create your own IQA strategy, and that's what we'll be covering next. Now, what is the purpose of IQA? So just think about it this way. If there's no external examination taken by learners, there needs to be another system of monitoring performance of assessors. So if not, how do you know assessors are making the correct decisions? Are they passing someone who hasn't quite met the requirements? So it's your role as the IQA to ensure that your assessors don't make mistakes and to help to make them to improve. And you want to ensure any assessment activity is being done safely, fairly, and consistent. And there must be a system in place to monitor this. And this is going to be your rationale. So a good IQA system will start with a rationale, and this is the reason why IQA takes place in the first place. And the reality of it, everyone's rationale for IQA is pretty much the same. It's all about that continuous improvement, ensuring your learners get a good learning experience. The key function of IQA is to ensure your learners have a quality process and have a quality journey throughout the learner journey. So a lot of IQAs will just do desktop paperwork at the end to send it off the awarding body and that's it, which in reality of is not good enough. Your whole purpose of IQA is to ensure the training journey or the training cycle is really good, and that starts from signing up your learners, teaching them, assessing them all the way through. And to help us become really good, we need to have our assessors making the correct decisions, and we also need to ensure that they consistently make these correct decisions as well. So again, we need to support and develop your trainers and assessors to make sure they can make these decisions consistently. And you can do this by supporting, advising, communicating with your assessors, or even other IQAs that you work with in all aspects of qualifications and CPD requirements. You'll need to carry out IQA activities, completing reports and maintaining records to help to facilitate the support to your assessors and that evaluation of the learner journey. You need to ensure that your qualification is consistent in the standards or qualifications of the assessor's decisions, and you can only do this by setting criteria for your assessor to follow and giving them support to do so. You can ensure the accuracy and consistency of interpretation of the standards and qualifications and assessment decisions by having regular standardization meetings, and that's ensuring that all your trainers and your assessors are assessing against the same standards. All qualifications, assessors and learners will have some kind of risk attached to them, and it's your job to assess this risk and then to manage it. At the end of the IQA cycle, it's your job to evaluate the quality of training, the quality of assessment, and the quality of internal quality assurance to make your training better next time. And it's a continuous improvement. Here is a sample rationale. We're just going to let you read this one. Your rationale should include a statement about SAFE. SAFE does not mean health and safety in this context. SAFE simply refers that the methods used to assess and internally quality assure are ethical, and there's little chance of plagiarism by your learners, the work can be confirmed as authentic, confidentiality was taken into account, learning was not compromised, nor was the learner's experience or potential to achieve. And how about valid? Valid means that the methods used were based on the requirements of the qualification, the standards of what was being assessed. What does fair mean? Fair means the methods used are appropriate to all learners at a required level, taking into account any particular learner needs, activities are fit for purpose, and planning, decisions and feedback are justifiable and equitable. And what about reliable? Reliable means a similar decision will be made for similar learners. Have a go at writing down your own rationale. So you'll need to include what will be sampled and when. And in terms of your assessment for the IQA, your sampling would include 2 assessors or at least 2 learners each, what and who will be observed and when, what will be standardized and when meetings will take place. Don't worry too much about standardization at the moment because we'll discuss this later on. Now write down what you think the role of an IQA is. Just pause the video and continue when you're ready. And we've already talked about the functions of IQA, and your role is going to be very similar. So it'll be creating an IQA policy, rationale and strategy, and it'll also be ensuring that your organization follows this policy, rationale and strategy. So you will review your program from sign up all the way to its conclusion and even certificating learners, and to improve that whole learner journey. And it's all going to be dependent upon your own individual role within your organization. Concepts of IQA can include being accountable. So you're going to be accountable leading the qualification to your organization and to any external bodies that the organization subscribes to. You need to follow the assessment strategy for your subject to ensure that you are carrying out your role correctly. And this will be part of the qualification specification if you're running regulated qualifications. You'll need to take into consideration any IQ activities such as assessor expertise or their confidence and competence, whether new, experience, qualified, or even just simply working towards an assessor award. Just by recognizing these risks, you can put in action plans to deal with it to ensure your qualifications meet the requirements. Evaluation of the assessment IQA process should always take place to inform current and future practice. So all aspects of the IQA cycle should be evaluated on this continuous basis to inform improvement. And it's all about that continuous improvement here. Now, interim and summative sampling. So interim is an ongoing sampling process. So you're dipping in and out of learners' work throughout the whole journey, whereas summative is you just IQAing your work at the end of the program. And unfortunately, a lot of training providers do this. And the problem is that if you IQA just at the end, if there's any problems within the qualification, it's too late to generally change it. So you're putting your learners at a massive disadvantage if you just do it this way. Transparency is about ensuring that everyone who's involved in the assessment process and even the IQA process really understands what is expected of them and there's nothing untoward going. VARCS is a term you should recognize by now. It's ensuring that your decisions are valid, authentic, reliable, current, and sufficient. And lastly, rationale. What is the purpose of quality assurance? What is the purpose of it? And it's generally about ensuring that your learners have a quality learning journey. We've got assessors competence, so you need to ensure that your assessors are experienced and competent to do their role. And you might have assessors who are newly qualified, and it's about how you support them to become experienced assessors. Communication, which should take place regularly at regular intervals, which will be communication with your learners, trainers, assessors, IQAs, employers, or witnesses. CPD or continuing professional development. So just watching this video counts as CPD. Equality and diversity is ensuring that all assessment activities embrace equality, inclusivity, and diversity and represent aspects of society and meet the requirements of the Equality Act. So we might be thinking about things along the lines of reasonable adjustments here. Ethics ensures that the assessment IQ process is honest and moral and takes into account confidentiality and integrity. So it means you also have to have those difficult conversations with learners regarding their progress. And record keeping is critical because you've got to comply by legislation. And if you don't maintain records, then you're not going to meet the requirements from the awarding organizations, which means your learners are not going to get their certificates. And SMART is about ensuring that all your assessment activities are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Here is a quick activity for you to do, and it's recommended that you pause the video. I want you to map the process from your course start to the certification process and put in as many different stages as there are within that journey. Once you've done that, I want you to have a go at drawing the IQA cycle. Now pause this video and give it a go. Now, as you can see, the IQA cycle is a continuous process and it's all about that continuous improvement to make it better next time. And the only way of doing this is to determine what we want to IQA, making plans to IQA qualification, setting our activities, giving feedback and making decisions, then evaluating the whole process and then start again. Remember that IQA is not just checking paperwork at the end to make sure it's compliant for submission. And if you are one of those training centers, then realistically, you're not going to get very far as a business. It should be about the quality of every aspect of the learner journey. So that's your starting process, that's your initial assessments, that's your teaching, that's your training, that's your assessing, that's everything. So first things first, you need to identify the product or the service and you need to determine what is to be assessed. And this is going to be your qualification or your course which you are delivering. What is going to be quite important here is if there is an awarding body and who is it. Now, a lot of awarding bodies are very similar, and the reality of it, they still have to follow the same standards. But the one thing that separates them is their interpretation of how you deliver that qualification, and you need to be very careful and review that qualification specification to ensure that you've picked up all the organization's requirements, and then you can actually build that as your own course, and then you can interpret it your own way from there. You need to think about any particular laws and regulations that may apply to your subject. So if we're looking at training or internal quality assurance, so the first we need to think about is our own subjects regulations. So there's lots of different ones out there. So you've got security, you've got first aid, early years, teacher training. All of these have their own particular requirements. You need to be aware of these. If you don't know what they are, you need to look at them and need to find them. The qualification specification document will give you hints and tips on actually how to construct your qualification and how you would IQA that. So you need to ensure that you meet your awarding body's requirements. Now you need to ensure that you have a standardized assessment process, and generally speaking, you need to go through the cycle to actually get a standardized assessment process in place. And this is okay. We always learn by experience. So once you've got that process in place, you look at how you can improve it. But first, once you know when you've got something in place, how do you implement it into your next lot of training activities? You need to look at if you have enough assessors. So if you're running a qualification, do you have enough assessors to actually facilitate that qualification, or are you going to be overburdening one or two assessors who just don't have enough time in the day to manage the workload? And again, these are going to generate you some extra risks which you need to deal with. Who are the learners? What are they studying? What do they want out of the program? So it's really important that you're able to identify who your learners are and what their motivations are for achieving the course. Now, think about if you want learners who are there, they want the cheapest course possible, so they're not going to be interested in the extra bonuses that you can offer them. So you need to ensure that your program is tailored to suit your audience. You need to ensure that your learners are allocated fairly to your assessors as well. So you might have assessors who are full-time, they work with you full-time. You might have assessors who are freelance. You might have assessors who are local to learners. You might have other sort of factors that you need to play into determining which assessor goes with which learners. You just need to ensure that you are allocating your learners fairly, so you're not disadvantaging any learners or even any of your assessors. Now, which policies and procedures will you need to have in place? So if you have been registered with an awarding organization, you should already have these policies in place. If you're thinking about starting up your own training company, these are things you need to have in place. Now, some awarding organizations will provide you with templates which you can just copy, or you'll need to do some research and ensure that your policy procedures meet the requirements from the awarding organization. First and foremost, you need to have a health and safety policy. Now, you need to ensure that your learners are going to be safe during assessment. You need to ensure that your staff are going to be safe during assessment. So we all need to follow the health and safety policy, and that includes your learners. Anti-bribery and corruption policy is to give you steps for your assessors to ensure that they remain ethical in their dealings, so they're not going to be bribed. So what are the consequences of learners giving them some chocolate? So they're going to be a bit more fair to them. But again, you need to ensure that you have your policies in place to avoid any sort of conflicts of interest. That leads us onto our conflicts of interest policy. Now, what you find a lot of the time is that you have employers wanting to save a bit of money, so they create their own training department. They get their training department accredited, and therefore they start training their own staff. Now, sometimes companies need staff to have certain qualifications, so there's a bit of a conflict here. So how do you deal with that? And your policy will set out how you deal with it. Legally, we all have to follow data protection policies, and you will collect learner information, and you'll need to share these with your awarding organization. So you need to have a process in place here. All organizations need to follow equality and diversity policies and legislation. So what do you have in place for equal opportunities? What about disabilities and diversity? So you need a policy here. What about reasonable adjustments? So what happens if a learner needs to make certain changes based on certain circumstances? It should all be listed here. And this is probably the most crucial one. What is your IQA policy? Now, you need to set your own policy and procedures of how you manage IQAs. Again, you as an IQA, you need to ensure that you follow these policies. Malpractice and maladministration, what are the processes in place if this occurs? So malpractice could be doing things you're not supposed to do for your own personal gain, or maladministration is just being a bit sloppy with paperwork, which can cause issues in the assessment process. So how do you identify it? What do you do about it, and who's involved in these stages? Quality assurance is very similar to a quality policy. So IQA is about your internal quality processes within a training department, where a quality policy is generally the overall business quality objectives. Now, you need to have something in place for your own training department. So what do you define as quality? How do you meet its objectives? What are you going to put in place to achieve those goals? Reasonable adjustments policies and special considerations are put in place to help you to give alternative arrangements to learners who need different assessments or they need extra help, and ensuring that you meet the requirements of your awarding bodies. Safeguarding policies to ensure that your learners are safe. So normally you'll be working with potentially vulnerable adults and children. It's to ensure that we hire the right people who are not going to put our learners at a potential risk. Whistleblowing should give our learners and our staff the ability to technically just blow the whistle if they see something that's unsafe or they see something untowards, to be able to raise that to the right people, whether that's externally or internally, without the fear of being victimized or disadvantaged. Retention of assessment and internal verification is very similar to your data protection policies, and it's how long you're going to be keeping assessment data and even ID records. Again, you're going to need to do this. Is going to be set by awarding organizations how long they request as well, so that will have a knock-on effect. Ensuring that your learners have access to fair assessment. So again, a statement of how you can help your learners to have a fair assessment. So whether they have any problems with your assessor or the process of being assessed, they've got something they can read and follow up on. And this could be your appeals and complaints policy. So what are the next stages for them to do if they're not happy with an assessment decision? The planning process is the most important part. It's to ensure that you have covered the different aspects or different risks that you can identify to ensure that the qualification is carried out effectively, it's done well, and it upholds the accreditation process. So in the eyes of your assessment, you need 2 assessors each with 2 learners each. So you need a plan to cover both assessors and both of those learners. So when planning, you need a sampling plan to monitor the assessment process. You don't just turn up and sample what's there. You need a plan in the first place, which will save you time and money. You need to ask yourself, what do you need to sample and when? And there may be times when you don't have time to sample everything, so you need to be opportunistic as well, being able to sample what you can and when you can. We should have dates available when our assessors and trainers are going to be going out teaching and assessing. So with these dates, can we put dates in the diary for us to go out and see them? Standardization is critical. In order for us to improve and our assessors to improve, we need to ensure that they're all standardized and they follow the same hymn sheet. And to do so, we need to put time in the diary for us to conduct these meetings. And lastly, we need to think about the assessor's expertise. So the more competent an assessor is, the less support we need to give them. But the new assessors to the organization or newly qualified assessors, they'll need that extra support, and we need to find the time to give them that support. Now, write down what goes in your own internal quality assurance plan. If you haven't got one, just have a guess. First and foremost, we need to think about the policies and procedures, and we might even go as far as law and legislation as well. So we need to ensure that our plans are in accordance with our organization's requirements and within the law. Assessment methods are critical because we need to ensure that we cover a full range of assessment methods. So it's not a case we just do desktop sampling, we just check portfolios. We need to actually go out and observe our trainers and our assessors in the actual training environment as well. We need to consider the experience, workload, and caseload of assessors, because these will influence their ability to carry out their job effectively. Number of learners to assessors can be essential based on the qualification requirements, but also think about the time that the assessors have to give to each learner. Now, if they're overworked, they're not going to be able to provide as much support as they should. Units within your own qualification, so you'll know your own subjects better than anyone else. Are there any areas where your learners consistently make mistakes? Are there any units which are difficult for your assessors to interpret? So with this in mind, you need to consider different units, how much support each unit needs, and again, come up with a plan which helps to address all the qualifications, but at the same time address those most important parts first. And lastly, evidence. How are we going to evidence that we do so? Now, within any regulated qualification, we need to evidence the IQA process and the whole journey. The camera method really helps you to bring together all the information you need to come up with your own plan. And it stands for candidates or learners, assessors, methods of assessment, evidence, records, and even assessment sites if that's applicable to you. Candidates and learners are going to be a selection of ages, genders, and ethnicities. So it's really important that you have a wide selection across different candidates. Again, are learners being disadvantaged because of their age or their gender or their ethnicity? So it's really important that we can have a good sample of each. Assessors include their experience and qualifications, their workload, and even their occupational experience. So how long have they been with the organization? What you'll often get is you'll get experience assessors move across to a different training organization. They're now assessing a complete different way, so they're going to be quite new. So they might need as much support as someone who's newly qualified, but have been with your organization for a longer time. And methods of assessment. So you need to sample all different types of assessment methods which are used by your center. Ensure that all types of evidence collected during your assessment are sampled. So this can include your witness statements, your check sheets, portfolios, anything that's collected as part of the assessment. Records relate to learner and assessment records. So these can be a bolt-on from the previous section of evidence. Assessment sites include all locations in which you offer the qualifications. What are the differences between interim and summative sampling? Unfortunately, a lot of centers just do summative sampling, which the reality of it is not great. So think about it this way. If mistakes happen during the program and you don't check it out or you don't evaluate it to the end when the learners have finished, then it's going to be a massive disadvantage if you need to make changes or if you find these mistakes. So imagine the response from a learner who's been told they've passed. You've now done an IQA and it's come back to them that actually, you know what, it isn't quite good enough, so you have to come back in and do it again. And unfortunately, I've known a few centers who've had to do this based on the quality assurance hasn't been good. So all it is doing is affecting that company's reputation. So from a business perspective, it actually makes your business look less professional and less attractive for new learners. So it's critical that you spend time to evaluate sampling during the program as well. Remember, if IQA does not take place, there are risks to the accuracy, consistency, and fairness of assessment practice. This can lead to incorrect decisions and ultimately disadvantage your learners. What risks are there to assessment? So there will be risks to any assessment. It doesn't matter how experienced your center is or your IQA is. It's all about recognizing what these risks are and then coming up with strategies to help you to reduce these risks to an acceptable level. Here are the most common risks. So the first one, we can start with assessor expertise, confidence, and competence. And in reality, even in IQA, a lot of IQAs don't really know what they're doing. So how do we ensure that our assessors are good at what they do, and what can we do to overcome that? So it's going to be that support, that guidance, that standardization is critical. If you don't help your learners or help your assessors, they're never actually going to improve. Another risk is when assessors who assess the same subject but with different groups of learners. So are they changing the assessment to help those learners, or are they remaining objective against the qualification standards? So we need to be aware of the differences assessors can make unconsciously through different groups of learners. Workload of assessors are going to be important because it's going to increase stress and reduce the amount of time assessors can make helping your learners, which ultimately can lead to poor decisions and poor feedback, which affects that training process. Language barriers, and mainly from your learners who may not speak English as a first language, how do they understand the assessment requirements? Locations of learners and assessors is important because the closer the learners and assessors are, the more opportunities they're going to get to be together to complete the practical assessments. Whereas if they are scattered across the UK, generally we're going to be relying on a lot of distance learning, submission by email. We're not going to get that same assessment practice. The type of qualification or program being assessed, are there any problem areas or units? And when it comes with CAVA qualification, there are a lot of problems based across the evidence. Now, some training providers do it one way, and other training providers do it another way. And because of that, when you get new staff, they go by the other procedures which they're used to, which may not necessarily be correct. And again, if you've got qualifications, more difficult to interpret. So when it comes to IQA, how many examples and how many learners do you need? There's going to be a lot of different ways of doing so, and it ensures that we must identify these problems and overcome them with solutions. We need to ensure that the assessment methods and types of evidence provided by the learners meet the requirements. So, are the witness statements coming in from the right people? Is the assessment plan including the assessment documentation as well? So is it just the IQA information we're getting, or are we ensuring that we receive copies of the assessor's documentation too? So actually that's going to help to facilitate the IQA decisions, which we're now going to be reviewing ourselves. What happens if computers are down and we can't access the documentation? What happens if the papers are stored in a location which we can't access? So there are always going to be pros and cons to using both. So again, identify what these are and come up with solutions to overcome that. And because the advantages of technology, especially using the internet, it also means the authenticity of learners' work, including plagiarism, needs to be addressed as well. Now, there have been times when I've even seen learners submit my own work. Again, we need to ensure that we recognize this and come up with ways to overcome it. Now, risk ratings, we always use RAG internally, but you can do it any way that you want to. So we use low, medium, and high. So low means there's less risk, medium means normal, and high means high risk. As you can imagine, low means less sampling, and high means more sampling. When there's more risk, we need to do more sampling. So this could include newly qualified assessors or those new to the centre, or even assessors who are continually falling short of the standard required. So if we identify assessors who are in this area, we should realistically be doing 100% sampling at least on the first course. Now, if that course goes well, we should be looking at 75% sampling, and then if that goes well as well, we might reduce that risk, or we will assess every sort of 3 months. So a problem a lot of centers do, they might find that their assessors are making mistakes, but they just automatically move on to lower sampling. You should never move on to lower sampling if assessors are making mistakes. So once you get confidence from your assessors because they're doing the job properly, that's when you should start lowering the sampling rates. So for medium are assessors who are generally in need of development but often meet the standard required. So you might sample every 50% of courses, so 50% sampling here, and this is going to be after you've gone through the high risk, so they'll fall generally down into medium. Then if that course is good, you might look at sampling 40% of their courses, and you might increase you might lower the amount of observations you do to every 6 months, but just be aware that different awarding bodies will have different observation requirements as well. So you just need to ensure that your plans address the AO's requirements as well. And this is what we want, is our assessors who are experienced with a qualification or unit that they've been assigned to, and they continue to meet the standards. So again, the more trustworthy they are, the less we need to sample. So on our 5th course, we might be looking now at 25% sampling, or even 10% sampling on their 6th course. Even an observation every sort of 12 months. So as you can see, the less risk they are, the lower the sampling rate for each one. But don't just assume because they're on the 2nd, the 3rd, or 4th course, we automatically sample at those rates. You need to continue sampling at the required rate until you have confidence in them doing good, which means the decisions are better and continuous improvements being found. Then you start lowering, and only then. So you may change your sampling rates. So where a qualification is new to a center, the first two cohorts should be sampled at 100% unless otherwise authorized by a awarding organization. So this should be anyone, regardless of their low risk or high risk. If it's new to the center, you should at least be quality assuring 100%. Now, if the sampling strategy of the AO overrides that of your center, and this could be due to your risk rating or actions resulting from monitoring activities, you must follow those sampling rates. It's not a case of you just go back to and just follow your own sampling rates. You must follow the AO's guidance, otherwise you're going to place more actions on your center. And lastly, where a contractual requirement requires additional sampling to take place, so this will not override the requirements of the previous two instances where the sampling rate would be or would require a lesser sampling rate to be adopted. So if you're doing any training for employers, then potentially they'll have their own requirements where you have to sample a certain percentage of courses. We're going to now look at 4 different ways in which you can sample learners' work. And this one is a vertical sampling type. So as you can see, 1.1 and 1.2 is sampled based on a fake qualification that we don't even put a title to. So unit 1, 1.1 and 1.2, which are the learning outcomes, are going to be sampled at 100%. So sampling for vertical is sampling one unit or a learning outcome across the assessor or sites. And in this manner, we've just sampled all assessors, all learners on unit 1. Horizontal sampling includes sampling something from several or all units or learning outcomes from one learner. So as you see here, we've picked out learner 1 and we decided we're going to sample everything of his work. Diagonal sampling is sampling across units and learners or assessors to get a wider picture of the overall quality of course delivery. This is the method I like to use because actually it means I can sample everyone's work, but at the same time is I can kind of reduce the amount that needs sampled. So if I'm reducing my sampling to, let's say for example 25%, you could look at do it this way, so you're covering like 1 in 4, or you could do it vertically and just do once every 4th learner. So it doesn't particularly matter. It kind of, you need to focus on your own ways of doing so and identify where potential risks are. And because you're not sampling 100%, there's always going to be the possibility that some things are going to get through which don't. And it comes to EQA, they should also sample what you sampled, but also sample parts that you haven't sampled as well to ensure there's a wider area that's been covered. Thematic sampling is sampling based on a particular activity. So in this instance, we've sampled all of Unit 2, 2.2. Now, let's just say, for example, this is a practical unit. And again, it's going to have higher risk, so we're going to concentrate on this area. So you might actually go across different units or different methods of assessment just based on any particular needs that you're looking to cover. Now, what do you think are the differences between selected and random sampling? So as you can imagine, selected sampling is when you request certain portfolios. You might recognize these or predetermine these before learners have started a program, or random sampling is just a case of, you know what, just chuck everything my way and I'm just going to pick a few out the hat and start sampling from them. And generally speaking, random sampling is better because it means we can ensure that assessors don't get too comfortable that you're only assessing certain portfolios or certain learners' work. So it ensures the quality is so much better. And if you need to sample other areas because of some things that you found, you can easily do so. So you're just about to IQA some of your assessors. What preparations do you think you need to make for IQA? So it's not a case of you just turning up and doing it. You need to plan lots of aspects. So this could even be something like travel, fuel card, what time you're going to be there, who you're going to meet. The preparations fall into 4 categories. So we're going to start with information collection. So again, you need to find out who are your assessors. Maybe you might look at what are their CVs, checking their CPD records, or you can do this annually. It depends on what you're sampling. You're also going to look at your qualification specification. Has this changed? Has the qualification requirements changed, or the AO's requirements change? You might look at the learner locations, learner registration numbers, IDs, initial assessments. So all this information should be collated and recorded so you can get started with your basic review. Communication is really important. So how are you going to communicate your plans with your assessors? And we're going to cover this actually briefly in the next task. But you should be able to formalize everything, what you're going to be assessing, what are the requirements. Again, this is going to help with standardization. And what is really important as well is when are your assessors actually assessing? Because if you're doing live visits, you actually need to be there at the same time. So you're going to need to communicate this information with them. Administration arrangements are generally the place where a lot of training centers fall short, and you need to ensure who's going to be responsible for sending information. It could be something as simple as updating learner information on a database, it can be checking registration numbers, registering your learners on a qualification through the awarding body. You need to ensure that you have procedures in place for dealing with the administrative obligations. Resources. So what do you need to carry out your role as an IQA? And it could be something as simple as I need a laptop, I need copies of resources which your trainer is going to use. I might need the AO documentation, I'm going to need my IQA plan, I'm going to need my IQA report, I'm going to need everything. So again, think about all the documents that you need as well, because these can be an important factor of you actually carrying out your role. So it's no good you say, right, I'm going to do on Tuesday, I'm going to be IQing your work. You need to have everything in place. You need to have your computer ready. You need your laptop open. You might need pens, paper. You need everything here to help you to do your job. Now you need to write down your sample plan. So you're going to complete one IQA sample plan for 2 assessors each. So with a minimum of 2 learners of their own. So you're going to need 2 sample plans covering 4 learners in total. And here is a sample plan which we would like to see. So you've got your 2 assessors, both with 2 learners each, and they will be doing 2 assessments each. So you might do this as a focus, right? We're just going to give you a small sample, or you might already be doing this qualification or doing IQAing, so you might have a wider plan. So again, that's fine, but you must as minimum cover 2 assessors with both 2 learners each. The next stage is to communicate your sampling plan. So if you don't communicate your plan, then how are you going to get all the information you need to carry out your IQ activities? So you need to communicate your plan with your 2 assessors. And in reality, the easiest way for you to evidence you communicating your plan is to attach your plan as an email and send it to your assessors. You might want to talk to them in person, talking about, this is what you're going to be doing. But in reality of it, how do you evidence that? Are you going to be recording a conversation you're having with your assessors? Or simply can you put it on a nice little document and then email it to them? It's going to be a lot easier for you to evidence. And when it comes to IQA, evidence is a big thing. The next stage is for you to carry out and record your IQA assessments. You need to have a plan to monitor the assessment process. So when are you going to be sampling? Or even what do you have to sample and when? So who are you going to be sampling at what time, where? This will include your dates. Now, if you're working as a freelance IQA, then you're going to need to be extra cautious with your planning as well. So again, you're going to need to fit in your observations throughout your own schedules on top. You need to plan your standardization meetings. At what points can you bring all your trainers in to go through the assessment strategies? And this will be for you to fit these into your diaries. And it's not going to happen easily where everyone can come in the same room at the same time. And you also need to identify what the assessor expertise is, because this is going to help you to determine how much support you're going to need to give them. So you might be there a little bit longer than usual if they need the extra support. So you might spend a bit more time going through assessment decisions to ensure that they are comfortable with what they're doing. As you're watching this video, you should already be familiar with the different assessment methods. So you've got the observation, is you watching a learner carry out a skill or perform an activity. Questioning, which can be written or oral questions to help find out learners' knowledge. The professional discussion is for your learner to demonstrate their knowledge in a particular subject and to discuss limitations, benefits of that particular topic. Projects and assignments can be set to allow your learners to research a particular topic and present it. Examining work products will be things that your learners will produce as part of a placement or in their workplace, which will save them having to redo extra work, and it saves them a lot of time. A witness testimony is where you will be using a third party to verify how that learner meets the learning outcomes. And the recognition of prior learning is for you to evaluate what the learner has previously done, whether that's through work or through a course or a qualification, and then applying it against another learning program to save them further time having to redo what they've already done. We've briefly talked about making decisions against specified criteria, and you can only make decisions which are against that criteria which you have set, and same with your assessors. So you need to ensure that these criteria have been clearly defined. Ethical means using the right methods at the right time and for their intended purposes as well. So making sure it's relevant to the context of assessment. So if you want to observe someone working, then you're going to be better using an observation rather than a witness statement. But again, the witness statement could be used if you don't get to observe that evidence. So ethical means that it's relevant to the assessment method. Safe should not be confused with health and safety. So it's confirming that the work is valid and authentic, which means it's the learner's own work. So there's little chance of plagiarism involved. So safe does not mean health and safety in this context. Fair means that the methods used are appropriate to all learners at the required level, taking into account any particular needs. All learners should have an equal chance of an accurate assessment decision. You might use things along the lines of reasonable adjustments to ensure your learners have the same opportunities, but you wouldn't treat them the same. You would give them the same opportunities. Now we're going to look at VARCs, and you should be aware of this already. So V stands for valid. The decision was based on the requirements of a qualification or standards being assessed. So you're assessing it based on those requirements, on nothing else. So valid, only assessing on requirements of the assessment. Authentic means that the work has been produced solely by the learner. You might use specialist software to check for plagiarism, and you can ask learners to sign an authenticity statement. This is one reason why we get all of our learners to sign a document to confirm that the work is theirs. So authentic means the work is produced by the learner only. So there's no other learners that contributed it. They haven't copied it from the internet, or even their tutor hasn't given too much support with the assessment. Reliable is all about that consistency, so standardization. So when we talk about reliability, a similar decision would be made with similar learners of the similar standard of work. So again, it's ensuring that we have consistency within our decision. And this is where your marking criteria is critical, because it actually gives you guidelines of how to follow and how to mark. Reliability is the consistent assessment decisions. Current means that the work is still relevant at the time of the assessment. So things will happen, time moves on, and different standards will change. So we could use COVID for an example in first aid, where during COVID there are no rescue breaths. Now that's gone, we have to do rescue breaths again. So it's critical that when we assess, we're only assessing against the current standards at the time of the assessment. Current means to be assessed against those current guidelines. Sufficient covers all the work and all the requirements at time, ensuring that all the requirements are being met by the learner, and including following organizational and assessment guidelines. An example of sufficient is where you give sufficient examples. So we always go by the rule of 5. So what happens there is if we get one that's not quite there, we've got enough other examples we can use to verify that the learner knows what they're talking about. So the depth of answer requirements, so it could be going by your verbs, have they given sufficient information, in-depth answers to meet those requirements? And we're all aware of what SMART means. So it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. So our assessments must be based on SMART targets. Here are some useful action words that you can use which are measurable. So you can use state, name, label, explain, demonstrate. Whatever you do, do not use the words understand, because how do you verify that someone's understood something? So you need to go into a bit more detail. So a good way to make a decision is to observe practice. So a good way of ensuring that the assessment and IQA practice is adequate is to see them in action. Not only this will give you an opportunity to see decisions made, but also enable you to have discussions with the assessors and the learners afterwards. You'll need to sample assess work, so you'll need to sample according to your own plan. However, you may need to sample more if you need to, depending on what you're going to see. So generally your plan is what we're going to go and aim for, but if there's opportunities for other work that comes to light, or there's other areas you need to dig deeper into, then expand your sampling. Remote sampling obviously has its benefits where you can be able to work remotely, work from home, work at a different office, work on the train to save you a bit of time. But there's also going to be some drawbacks of remote sampling. Don't get in the habit of just doing remote sampling, because you're not going to be able to see the assessment in practice. So again, you need to have that live observation as well. So it should be a combination of all. You need to set your risks for your assessors. So are your assessors competent in their role, or they need further support? So based on these risks, you'll need to alter your sampling rate. And you might also adjust your risk ratings depending on the qualification or the units that you are quality assuring as well. So again, the more difficult they are, the more sampling you'll do. Finally, you'll need to agree action and improvement points with your assessors. So this should be linked to your CPD, so linking it to best practice and for that continual improvement. So what did the assessors do well? What could they do better? And give them opportunities to develop to make them become better assessors. Now that we've gone through planning our IQA sampling plan and we have carried out the IQA assessments, we now need to complete our IQA reports. So you'll make a judgment as to whether the assessor has performed satisfactorily and make valid and reliable decisions. So, have they correctly referred? Have they correctly passed their learners? You need to provide that developmental feedback as to what was good or what can be improved. Don't feel like it's just everything was fine and then we just don't make any suggestions. It's all about helping your assessors to become better. If necessary, agree these action points and then follow up. And it's really critical from an EQA perspective that you do follow up these actions, because the EQAs want to see you as an IQA setting targets for your centre and for your assessors, but there's no point in you setting them if you don't follow them up in the first place. Why should you give feedback? Now, it creates opportunities for clarification and for discussions and progression. It can emphasize progress rather than failure. It will boost the confidence and motivation of your assessors, and it can identify further development and learning opportunities or even actions required. So that two-way conversation enables you to identify the assessor's own internal thoughts and reflections to actually help to put together a plan for them. Are probably familiar with the praise sandwich, which is also known as the constructive sandwich. So what we start with is a positive, so what was good. Then in the middle, which is our meat, we put in together our development points. So this is what you could do better. And we always follow up on something positive. And this praise sandwich is about giving developmental points, but at the same time as motivating and making your assessors feel good about themselves as well. What is very critical about giving feedback is that you don't hide from it. A lot of assessors or a lot of IQAs don't want to upset other people, so they don't give their honest feedback. And this feedback is crucial for that assessor to be able to improve. So you need to ensure that you set really good marking criteria, because that means you can then keep your decisions based on facts rather than the opinions, and you want to keep it focused on the activity. Always state what was good and what needs to be changed, identify the strengths and limitations, and how that assessor can improve. Always check for clarification to see they understand what's been said, but follow up by keeping your records. Now that we've carried out our IQA reports, we're now going to evaluate your assessor's expertise, and we're going to reflect on your own practice. And you can see how these tasks fit into the evaluation stage of the IQA cycle. So you're going to review the whole process of the assessment and IQA to determine what could be improved and done differently. You'll agree action plans if necessary, implement and follow up. And follow any action plans from EQA or others involved in the IQA process as well. So any action set by the EQA must be followed up and it must be carried out. Standardization is a key purpose of the IQA cycle, and sadly it's something that's often overlooked, generally because a lot of training centers don't really see the value in standardization. Standardization is about improvement and having that consistent experience regardless of the qualification that you're delivering, the staff that are delivering it, and the whole process. So regardless of the learner, regardless of which the learners are, that service or that continuous service is going to be the same regardless. So that's how we get our consistency. So we should also use standardization as an opportunity to discuss changes and developments. Talk to your team. We can ensure assessment decisions are fair by discussing it and reviewing previous made decisions. We're able to comply with relevant codes of practice and regulations. So these could be the awarding body's requirements, or it can be law. So this could be health and safety, it could be equality and diversity. And again, it's discussing it and looking at best practice situations. One of the key things is consistency and fairness of judgments and decisions. And the purpose of standardization is to ensure that all of us across the board are assessing at the same level. We can also reassess to spot errors or incorrect decisions so that we can overcome them and ensure that our learners are not disadvantaged by correcting them early. We can set action plans for the development of training and assessment activities. Share good practice so everyone's aware of what is really good and what's not. And also it improves the morale of the team if you are highlighting things that you do well. Lastly, spotting trends or inconsistencies so that we can improve the areas notified. Pause this video and write down all the standardization activities that you do carry out. Here is a rough plan of a standardization plan across the year, and we split it into two categories. We've got assessors and IQAs. So we get our assessors together at regular intervals, and we also have separate meetings for our assessors also to get together to follow up on these team meetings. So again, standardization going through any particular unit. So the way that we set this out is that we go through one unit at a time. Just remember, you're probably not going to have time, especially when it comes to the larger qualifications, to go through the whole qualification in one go. So we want to look at doing it over the course of a term or the course of a year. One of the final tasks is that you need to submit your CPD records. So what are the CPD requirements in your own sector? And then look at how you can ensure that you meet those requirements. And we always start off by asking, why are you actually on this course, or why are you watching this video? And it's generally to learn more to help you become a better IQA or become a better assessor or become better at your own subjects. Now link it to your own IQA practice. Just by knowing about IQA gives you a better understanding of how to plan, how to carry out, how to record IQA. So actually it's going to make you better. Even if you're just an assessor, then knowing IQA helps you to understand the process and actually can facilitate you helping the IQA a lot more. And again, it's for you to recognize your own development of where you can move in the future. Organizations should have a goal of some sort. So think about the next 12 months, think about the next 3 years or the next 5 years. Where does your company wish to go? Because the answer to this will help you facilitate the CPD opportunities your staff need to undertake. As an IQA, you need to be considerate of the CPD needs of your team as well. So you need to understand where your company wants to go, and you need to come up with CPD opportunities for your team to help your company get there. So it's not just about you anymore, it's about your whole team. The last task for you to complete your IQA is to submit standardization records. Now we know what standardization is, we know what activities they are, so we now need to submit those records to demonstrate that we can carry out standardization. Now, a lot of organizations do standardization, but they don't evidence it very well. So how do you evidence standardization? So you could record your meetings. You could also write up minutes of what was discussed, what you found, and what the follow-up actions are. And the most important thing as well is once you've identified actions, you need to carry them out. Now, the reasons you should keep these records is, firstly, you need to satisfy the awarding organisation and regulatory bodies requirements. So it's always a requirement that you maintain standardization records. Without doing this, you could lose your accreditations. You need to show a valid audit trail for all your activities to keep track of communications with assessors. And this is really important as well for your assessor development. And you might even go down the routes of HR as well. What happens if your assessors fail to implement the actions that you set them? So again, you might need to go down that formal process. You keep records in case of complaints or appeals against your decisions, and to handle them and help you as an IQA to be able to review what has been completed, what actions have been taken, and how you can actually help to deal with that situation. And you've got standardization and quality assurance purposes. Again, keeping records helps you to identify problems, helps you to monitor data, and ultimately helps you to improve as a center. Now, we've actually gone through the 5 steps of IQA. So you need to create an IQA policy. You should be able to do that now. You should be able to complete a sampling plan. You should be able to carry out an IQA assessment. You should be able to record IQA assessment decisions, and you should be able to produce a standardization plan.